Hello, this is Miguel Quime here with your news update at the top of the hour. Let's jump right into the news. A recent psychological study has shown when dying, people pass through a universal series of psychological stages. Those stages are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Apparently, those stages are widely accepted in the medical, psychological, and nursing communities in the United States. But does everyone really experience those 5 stages, or do they only experience a few? Do they experience them in that particular order or in a different order? For more on this subject, we will now go to Kimbery Ramos, who will interview 2 psychologists and 2 medical experts.
Hello, this is Kimbery Ramos with more coverage on this issue. We have with us today psychologist Rischel Tabiolo and physician David Palafox, who are in favor of DABA, and they're going to be called the pro side. On the con side, we have psychologist Dmytro Pachenko and med student Jenoa DeVargas, who has been involved in various research studies.
Hello, and thank you for having me. Allow me to start by saying that death is frightening. The thought of your life coming to an end may, and most often is, terrifying. This is partly because we don't know what comes after. No human has ever died and come back to life to give a definite account of what comes after death. It continues to be, and may very well remain, a mystery for all of human existence. However, just because we don't know what comes after death doesn't imply that we don't know what comes before it. By this, I mean how we choose to come to terms with it. For some, this may be a daunting and almost impossible task. There is no right way of doing this. We have nothing. In 1969, Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, a Swedish thanatologist, entered the realm of the unknown. Her book, On Death and Dying, was perhaps the first ever attempt to understand what an individual goes through when faced with imminent death. Her model, nicknamed DABDA, gives a series of stages an individual may go through when faced with such a chilling prospect.
If we can now have the pro side further introduce us into the topic of DABDA and further provide definition as to what it stands for.
The first stage is denial, in which a person first learns about bad news and finds it hard to come to terms with reality. This is considered a defense mechanism to buffer the immediate shock. The second stage is anger. The pain of reality is hard to bear, and a person may be angry at a doctor who diagnosed the illness or even the dying or deceased loved one. Next is bargaining. People feel vulnerable and helpless, and in order to regain control, they start to think about the what-ifs. Some even bargain with God. The fourth stage is depression, in which a person mourns, somewhat of a preparation to separate and say goodbye to our loved one. Last comes acceptance. A person is finally able to cope with loss in a healthy way and begin the process of healing. The 5 stages of grief are so widely accepted by society because they are applicable to any catastrophic personal life, such as divorce, drug addiction, the onset of a disease, as well as many other tragedies. For example, many people perceive death as a terrifying and unpredictable experience, but Kübler-Ross's theory offers a neat and tidy prediction to one of life's most mysterious processes. The 5 stages of grief should be accepted by many because it reassures people that the unsettling experience of death ends in peaceful acceptance. The 5 stages of grief is also important in helping people who are dealing with tragedies understand what they are feeling. Those who have researched Kübler-Ross's theories have observed that the stages do not particularly occur in order, but are still present. Thus, the stages offer a guideline of the 5 general emotions that a person will experience during grief.
Can you guys now provide support for your position?
Throughout my career in the medical field, I've come across several patients that, unfortunate to say, are dying. As a physician, I try to connect and relate with my patients as much as I possibly can. But in regards to patients like these, there's nothing relatable about this. I've never been in a situation where I wouldn't come out alive. In short, I've never been actively dying. I cannot fathom what patients such as these are actually going through. There's nothing I can say or do that will give them some sort of comfort. Although I cannot relate, I can certainly try to relate. And for this, Dr. Kübler's model is such a powerful guide. It allows me to attempt to understand what my patients are going through. It gives me an idea of how they're coping with the prospect of death and how I, as a doctor, can help this process become less stressful and scary. I'm not in the dark as I would be if I had nothing to refer to. Dr. Kübler's model gives each individual faced with death some sort of comfort. They are not alone in this world, and whatever they're going through, someone else has gone through the same. It has revolutionized how the U.S. medical field has cared for terminally ill patients.
Now we're going to have the con side provide us with their support as to why they believe that DABDA is not a scientifically acceptable phenomenon.
In my opinion, as a psychologist, DABDA is a flawed concept, which therefore should not be used as our primary theory that describes the states of those who experience an impending death. Here are some of the reasons why this is my opinion. First of all, this concept isn't based on the scientific research, but instead is based on conclusions that psychiatrist Kubler-Ross arrived to from her observations of mostly biased samples and unstandardized human emotion. Finally, this theory is also often applied to explain the mental state of the people who recently experienced the loss of a loved one. This is also a deeply mistaken concept because people deal with the recent loss in a variety of ways. For example, on one side we have people that never really go through grieving in a traditional sense following a loss, yet on the other side we still have people that are grieving and may still be in a denial even many years later after such event. This is why most psychologists today do not accept DABDA as a theory for explaining death. Also, further research has shown that there are many ways in which people deal with oncoming death. Many people go through the described stages in different orders, and some people skip these stages altogether. We can see that in the real world, the boundaries between the stages are really small, and we also have no evidence for the so-called sudden jumps between the stages.
So for the past few years, I've been involved with a research group that has been studying this phenomenon. We conducted multiple experiments to see how people cope with dying. And first, what we had to do with this is we had to figure out a way to objectively measure how people's emotions are over time. After we did this, after we created a way to objectively measure that, we were able to see and observe how if people actually do go through these 5 stages of DABDA. And what we found was that a greater percentage of people deal with death in their own and unique way. And with this, some of the stages were present, while other times none of the stages were present when people were coping with dying. And few people actually exhibited signs of all 5 signs, and even fewer went through the 5 signs of DABDA in the exact order. Our findings have supported the theory that these stages aren't a universal process that everybody goes through when coping with dying.
Dr. Tabiolo and Dr. Palafox, do you guys have any further comments with regards to what they just said?
It's easy to forget that Dr. Kubler's model is simply that, a model. It's not a process, it's a model. The difference is that a process is fixed. A model is more of a reference or guide, and Dr. Kubler has clearly stated that. In her last book, Before Dying, she acknowledged that the way that each of us deals with death is as individual as we are. And although not deeply rooted in the scientific method, it's not meant to harm anyone. Its claims haven't made death any more frightening than it already is. Au contraire, it's meant to give order to something as chaotic as death. The illusion of order is more comforting than the verity of chaos.
Okay. Because the 5 stages of dying doesn't follow the scientific method, it shouldn't be so widely adopted and misrepresented by the media as fact.
I think that what we get from this is that some truth is found in the 5 stages of dying, but there's not enough evidence for us to fully accept it and apply it as a rule of thumb.
And that concludes our daily news report.